Whether you like it or not, Canada has a lot more to lose in a trade war than the US. Let's take a closer look at this now that Donald Trump is back on the tariff train and as of today has implemented 25% tariffs on all vehicles made outside of the US. Obviously, this is going to have a major impact on Canada because Canada produces a lot of cars that get sold to the US, and it'll have a disproportionate impact on the province of Ontario. The US and Canada share the world's largest bilateral trade relationship. But what happens when this relationship becomes strained? First, let's talk about the scale of trade. Picture this. Over $1 trillion in annual trade and investment flows between these two nations. But here's the kicker. While this might sound like a balanced relationship, the numbers tell a bit of a different story. So you can see this map here, which admittedly, these are maps from 2017 data, the last time we dealt with this, and I'm going to get into that. But the relationship hasn't changed substantially since then. Here's where things get interesting. Over 2/3 of Canada's exports go to the US. That's more than what Canada sells to its next 9 largest trading partners combined. These maps, as I mentioned, were originally created during the first Trump presidency, 2017 to 2021, when similar trade tensions emerged. Looking at the situation in 2025, the fundamental trade relationship remains remarkably similar. Canada still sends approximately 2/3 of its exports to the US, while America maintains diversified export portfolio with multiple trading partners. These interconnected supply chains, particularly in the automotive sector, continue to be a critical vulnerability for Canada. Ontario's manufacturing sector remains just as exposed to potential disruption from UF tariffs. The hard part about vehicles is they're not technically made in any of these 3 countries except for one automaker, ironically, and probably going to be highly politicized, Tesla. All of the other vehicles that are sold in the US markets are made up of different components from all 3 countries, the US, Canada, and Mexico. The same strategic pressure points exist. Canada still relies heavily on US markets, while America's economy remains far less dependent on Canadian trade. In fact, these maps show that Canada relies overwhelmingly on the US for trade. You can see a significant amount of trade going to the US and a very small amount of trade going to other partners around the world. And a lot of this is just geography. It's a lot easier to just push goods across the border than it is to ship them to far away places. Logistically, the costs are significantly less. And so it allows us to be more competitive. What makes the current situation particularly concerning is the underlying economic dynamics haven't changed significantly since the last round of trade tensions, except today Canada has the target on her back. Canada's attempts to diversify its trade relationships over the past several years haven't substantially altered the balance of power in the trading relationship. Now, let's flip the script a little bit. Let's look at what that looks like from the US. The US does not rely exclusively on Canada for trade, not even close. The US only sends about 18% of its exports to Canada. International trade makes up 64% of Canada's GDP, but only 27% of America's GDP. So this is a very uneven playing field. The auto industry obviously presents a particular vulnerability. Canada's manufacturing heartland could see auto production drop by 40% with just a small tariff, and the OECD has predicted that auto exports would be reduced from 3 to 5%. And Oxford Economics put out a really good map on this to understand the city-by-city exposure to U.S. trade in Canada. And you can see that we obviously have a really high exposure in the 401 corridor, basically from Windsor to Quebec City. A lot of this takes place in the manufacturing, especially the auto manufacturing sector. I think there are other ways, especially in an election in Canada right now, that Canada could push back without triggering a new chapter in the trade war, as mentioned by economist David Rosenberg, would be to a massive cut in the top marginal tax rates. He mentions taking a feather out of Ireland's cap to make Canada a global tax haven, one that would not just prevent existing capital flight. We're seeing a lot of wealth leaving Canada, but also trigger an investment boom, a lot of wealth coming back into Canada. And it would really hit the U.S. where it hurts. We know that it's important for Donald Trump to be repatriating a lot of this wealth. That seems to be one of his big objectives right now. So again, in this high stakes economic chess game, and we know that a lot of folks think that Donald Trump's playing 4D chess, maybe 60 now at this point with this new move. Ontario, Canada's manufacturing heartland, could see auto production drop, as we mentioned. And while we can't avoid damage entirely, strategic responses might help minimize the impact. The question isn't really who's right here. It's who can endure the most pain and who can actually afford to come to the negotiating table here.